Rupert, how you doing?
I'm terrific, thanks, Fergus. Great to catch up with you.
Indeed, indeed. I've heard you say that one of your fondest memories as a child was spending an entire day surfing at Bondi Beach, knowing that when you got home, your parents were going to go through you. And is the solitude and the peace and that effect something that you found on two wheels?
Oh, certainly, Fergus. I think you refer to those days on Bondi Beach as a kid, and I just remember the long, endless summer, and just being on the hill and or looking at the waves, and then going in and surfing when I could when it was when the waves looked good. But then on two wheels, it is the same sort of free spirit that you get, and I do find it as a platform to escape much of the clutter in my mind and sometimes the clutter in my life. And once you get rolling on the bike and you go for endless of miles or kilometres, you get so much clarity of mind. Someone just asked me today, how did I ride 1,000 kilometres last year in Centennial Park, the local park here in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, which is just a 3.8 kilometre circuit. And I just said the same thing. I just let the momentum get me, and the feel of the bike being a part of me, and then the touch of the wheels on the road, and there's a rhythm that comes with it, and before you know it, your mind just sort of opens up like a big onion of thought, and you're peeling it away, and then you suddenly find yourself really relaxed, even though you're physically fatigued.
With no parents to breathe down your neck when you get home.
Exactly, 100%.
So, from those days, the peace you found growing up in the outdoors in Australia, it's one of the things I'm most envious of Australia, actually, is the quality of life and the opportunity you have to try lots of new things in a nice setting. We have opportunity to try new things in Scotland in a less pleasant setting, but that's what makes the country beautiful. But I was very grateful for having so much opportunity in terms of sport growing up here, and I know that Australia is the same. So, what led you into journalism? Was it a fascination for the depth and range of sport, the individuals, the immersion into the event? How did you find yourself in that line of work?
I mean, after I left school at the age of 17 or 18, I didn't actually immediately direct my life towards journalism. In many ways, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I dabbled in cooking for a year. Went to a chef school for a year. That didn't last very long. Luckily, I came away with all my fingers intact, not cut off. But I think after a while, I worked in a pub for a year. I enjoyed communicating with people. I think that was something I got out of working in a pub. But then, my mother, she was a journalist, and I used to follow her career quite closely. And I guess I was intrigued by it in many ways. But then again, I didn't really have this conviction that this is a career I want to follow. But then I was looking for a job at one point, and then she saw an advertisement for a position for a copy boy. At that time, we used to have copy boys and copy girls, which were very much gophers in an office. You had to, just do anything and everything that the editors and the journalists, asked of you. And then I got a job there at News Corp Australia in Surrey Hills in Sydney, and I remember then it was like the old days when the papers were being printed and the pages were being drawn up by sub-editors, and there was typewriters. There was I don't smoke, but there was like cigarette ashtrays and everyone smoking, and there was all the noise, and there was all the excitement and the hub of it, and you'd have 4 editions a day, and I guess there was this rush. It was like this crazy mad rush of activity by everybody, and if you made a mistake, you had, photo files thrown at you, you were yelled at or whatever, and but it was never a negative experience. I just found it a massive rush. I got like an adrenaline rush. So obviously, through there, I was promoted to become a cadet, which is like an apprenticeship, which went for 3 years. At that time, you didn't have to go to university. So this was in the early 80s, 1980s. You didn't have to go to university, so you do this cadetship or apprenticeship for 3 years, which you'd be moved around the newspaper group from different papers, from the tabloid papers such as the then Daily Mirror to the broadsheet newspapers such as the Australian newspaper, which still exists today. You'd work on different areas of the papers, from the police rounds to the courts to industrial rounds to general news to the gossip page even. And inevitably, I came upon the sports section when I was moved to the Australian, and I guess that was then considered like the toy room, because sports journalism at that time didn't really have a sort of a status to it that other areas had to it. But in my career since, I think we've all seen some terrific sports writers, and I think the status of the sports section has very much been elevated, particularly with the broad nature of topics that can be covered in sport. So I became a sports journalist, and that's how, when I got graded as a journalist, I was a sports journalist, and I have been ever since. So I'm just about to turn 61, and I was about 24. So it's been quite a journey in very numerous sports and different sections of the newspapers, different newspapers, magazines, and also freelancing.
It's quite a cutthroat industry from what I've heard. Well, fast-paced. You've got to really get out there and go after things to be able to get stories. You've got to badger people, and you've got to operate in a way that's probably a bit unique to other industries. So what was the harshest lesson that you learned early on in those younger years? Because apprenticeship, I'm sure, set you up for a lot of things from a practical point of view, but the actual human operational interactions that you can only learn through experience, what is the one that sticks with you most?
I'd say... well, when I was a first-year cadet, I remember typing away, trying to type. I never learned how to type properly. I've always been a two-finger typist. We did have to learn shorthand, which I managed to do just scrape through, and I think I peaked for the exam, and I guess my shorthand went downhill ever since. But I do remember the absolute bollocking I used to get from the chief of staff. And he was a fabulous chief of staff and very highly respected. So what I'm saying is not being disrespectful to him, but his name was Harry Shering. But he was this tall, broad-shouldered, statuesque, older guy who was then in his late 60s to 70s. And I was young, so he was this towering figure and presence in the newsroom, and he scared the bejesus out of me, because whenever he called you up, it was always for something pretty bad that you've made. And it was actually something as simple as a spelling mistake. But what he was really doing was reinforcing the importance of detail, which I think in all our projects and things I've worked on since is, the devil in the detail. Don't get that right, that can come unstuck. But at that time, it would be a mistake which I guess, which embedded in you a respect for the work that you're doing. And the trade or craft that you're being a part of, and the lessons can be harsh through those mistakes being pointed out. The story you write may be just torn up and told, well, you've made too many mistakes. You've missed the edition. Go back and do it again. And if you miss the edition, the first edition, you may not get into the second. So that competitiveness, but the need for detail was reinforced, from the very beginning. Along the way, I've made some near mistakes. I think when I was in the state of Victoria, I was covering cricket, and I was down at seeing the Victorian cricket team training, and I remember I was asked to go and interview one player, and I just turned up, and I hadn't been in Melbourne for long, and then a fellow journalist said, "Oh, who are you going to talk to today?" And I said I was going to speak to so and so, and they said, "Oh, there he is over there." So I went across to where these two people were, and to sort of introduce myself, and I started interviewing the person who I thought was the person I was meant to be interviewing. I came back and sat down, and my other journalist said, "Oh, wow, okay, you just thought you'd just go and interview the Australian captain then." And I went, "Oh, yeah, I didn't realise I'd interviewed the Australian captain."
Yes, that's exactly what I meant to do, of course.
Yes, exactly. I said, hey, when there's an opportunity, you always got to take it. And I remember thinking...
Wiping sweat from your brow.
I'm sweating at the thought of it now, because it brings back memories. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, did I just get the name right or wrong? And it was Graham Yallop at the time. And I remember thinking, well, I never said the other person's name. So ostensibly, he still thought that I knew who he was. and any of the questions I asked were general enough to warrant an answer from the Australian captain. So I went back to the editor on the phone back in Sydney, and he said, "How did you go with so and so?" And I said, "Look, I hope you don't mind. I just there's an opportunity here, and I took a shift in what we spoke about, and I thought I'd had a chance to speak to the Australian captain, so I seized it. I hope you don't mind." And he said, "Oh, Rupert, fantastic, mate. I love this intuitive instinct in you." So that could have been such an embarrassing mistake, but
I believe the phrase is "flying by the seat of your pants." But all of the best lessons that I've learned over the years have come from flying by the seat of my pants. My dad's always been the same. Everybody I know, it's always the sort of diamond in the rough is when a big mistake was about to be made. You can salvage something from it. So with that in mind, you've covered Olympics, multiple Rugby World Cups, cricket, and what have been the highlights along the way? Because the experiences that go along the way, some of the world-beating events that you get to see. I found myself rewatching the 31-0 to 38-all England-Scotland rugby highlights the other day, just because I kind of got it in my head and thought I want to watch the highlights from that again, because I think it was the best game of rugby I've ever seen. As a English-sounding Scot, it means I can play both sides, and both sides kind of won that day, really. So days like that, you'll have experienced hundreds. What were the highlights along the way that you really hold fondly in your memories?
I'd have to include the 2011 Tour de France, which Cadel Evans became the first Australian and the oldest post-war Tour winner. Because when I first started covering cycling, I guess in the early 80s, my dream was to one day see an Australian win the Tour, and I never thought that would actually happen after a while, and particularly with Cadel Evans's topsy-turvy career until he just found the mojo and the right space of mind and the support to do it. So I guess that's an obvious one. But there's been others. In Sydney 2000 Olympics, when Cathy Freeman won the 400 metres, that night was such an exceptional night of not just for Cathy Freeman's win, but at the athletics meet that night. There was so many great events going on. I was working on the Australian at the time, and we actually had 11 people who were selected to be part of the Cathy Freeman reporting team for the paper. I mean, this is for a 400-metre race that lasts, 45 seconds or 48 seconds. 11 people doing 11 different jobs. My job was actually, you talk about mistakes, mine wasn't the grandest job. I was told that I had to draw up a graph and have the 8 finalists, and I had to insert the split times for from the reaction time of the start to the 100 metres, 200 metres, 300 metres, and 400 metres. And I had about 30 seconds to send it through because it was right on deadline. And I thought, well, it's not the grandest job. It's got to be one of the hardest. And I thought, I better test myself here with the 400 metre men's hurdles, because I thought that could be a bit slower, and I could actually get into my rhythm of writing down all these split times. Of course, the men's hurdle went, and I barely got 1 or 2 times in, and that's when I realised, oh my gosh, I'm in big trouble here. And then the Cathy Freeman 400 metre race came up, and it started, and I think I froze, and my fingers just stuck there going, like this. And suddenly it was all over. Everyone's going, how fantastic was that? I'm just staring at my blank chart here going, oh my God, I've got nothing here. And someone gave me the reaction times from the start, and I managed to put in the finishing times, which they had obviously. So I guess I failed on my mission of the Cathy Freeman night. But the rest of the night was such a fabulous thing. And at the end of that night, we'd all finished our work, and I'm just down at the track where the mixed zone is, where athletes speak to the media. And there was me and a group of about 5 others who were working on the Cathy Freeman story, and the stadium had been vacated by spectators. The cleaners were just cleaning up the joint, and a colleague just said, hey, Rupert, what about let's just do our own 400 metres? So we all lined up, and did our own 400 metres. And the cleaners stopped and started applauding us as we ran around, And,
multiple torn hamstrings.
Yeah, it was as what happens. We all thought we'd just do it slowly, but what happens? We all start racing, and I've got a picture of me, throwing my arms up across the line, and of course we didn't. The guy wrote a story about it, but he didn't write it till after the Olympics because we would have lost our accreditation for that, I'd suggest. You probably couldn't do that now. So that was a fabulous night. But other events, the 2003 Rugby World Cup final with Australia and England in Sydney, and the Johnny Wilkinson drop goal, a field goal, and how that game already went to near on 100 minutes was. I mean, England were the better team, but Australia managed to just push that further and further and further, and it got to that goal, and it still resonates with me that evening there, and there's a sea of white and a sea of gold in the crowd, and it was a fabulous night of rugby, and it was such a, and I worked that night as well. So there are just a few of the biggest highlights.
I can imagine being there must have been phenomenal. And what was it like afterwards? Was there bitterness in the pubs afterwards? Was there a white v gold, or was it just classic rugby? Okay, good shift, everybody. That was nail biting. Here we are again.
Yeah, it was pretty much that, because I think most people recognise that the English team were the better team. Australia had a blinder against beating the All Blacks in the semi-final, but it was I think everyone was really heartened by how Australia was still managed to hang in there. That they had a grit there that they could do it. That night, my brief, besides doing something, a simple task, which had to follow on full time, but I also had to follow the Wallabies they wanted me to write a colour story of how they absorbed the defeat back at their hotel. Of course, they were absolutely gutted, absolutely shattered, and they really didn't want to talk. So I was sitting there doing the midnight till dawn shift at the hotel, hoping a couple of them may come out, but they didn't. They were stuck in their own room, and some of the players were, Justin Harrison, the second rower, he threw his silver medal, into the water, which just recently he's been given a new one by World Rugby, and when he was given this silver medal, he burst into tears when he was given it because he realised, his throwing away something. Okay, it was a silver medal. He wanted the gold medal, but the significance of such a thing like that, and to throw something away, which is still, in hindsight, he realised the importance of it, and he realised his mistake, and being able to have that opportunity to still have a silver medal to show his children and friends, it's an important thing, I think, and we all have to learn to lose, don't we? And to accept what we learn from losing. So
we do, and that's a fantastic way of really bringing to life something that we both share. You've done it across longer distances on two wheels by some margin, but the process being more important than the outcome, the journey being more important than the destination, and that silver medal example is a great way of looking at that a silver medal as the outcome of a fantastic World Cup campaign does not define the campaign. It's the process that got you there that matters more than the piece of metal that you're given, in the same way that I'm sure when you're 6 days into 12 days and race across America this summer, you'll be thinking, oh, this is awful, I can't wait to get to the finish line. But reflecting upon it, the process and the journey is what matters. So with that in mind, what led you to ultra endurance cycling? Because you had a top-down view of all these sports, all these opportunities, and it was a sadistic long distance disrespect for your backside that you chose.
Yeah, when I first heard about Race Across America, I was actually living in Belgium at the time, editing a cycling magazine called Winning, and there was an American cyclist who was one of the first Americans to do the Tour de France, Jonathan Boyer. And I remember he went and did Race Across America and won it twice. And I remember thinking, because we put him on the cover, and I remember thinking, what a stupid, idiotic event that is. Like, little did I know that this was like in the late 80s. Little I know, here we are in 2022, and I'm going back for more, to try and have another crack at it. But I think my I was always driven by, I guess, endurance sport is what attracted me even through my career, and and a lot of that goes back to my childhood, where when I was a kid, I was fairly bit of a rolling poly sort of kid, and I think I sort of developed some self-esteem issues over. I probably wasn't able to explain it to myself at the time, but it would have been body image issues, and people having fun at me a little bit about my weight, and I guess I sort of felt some lack of worth or value, particularly because I wasn't good at the cool sports. I was no good at cricket, no good at tennis. I couldn't run that fast. Even in rugby, the only position I played was tight head prop, and no one passed the ball to the tight head prop. So these little things sort of built in me, built up a lack of self worth or self esteem, and so what I did, I chose endurance sports because I thought I'll find something that's hard that others may not do, but to find that self worth by doing the hard sport, I'll tap into something which I did obviously find. And so rowing was the first endurance sport that I did, and I did that at school, and I continued to do it after school. But as after school, and I still love rowing. I think it's one of the most beautiful sports. It's one of the hardest sports, and I love reporting on it. And I've had the privilege to do that at Olympics and World Championships. But when I continued rowing, I was too short to be a good heavyweight, so I had to lose weight, quite a lot of weight, to make lightweight, where you had to weigh in like jockeys and boxers before a race, otherwise you couldn't race. And I found that quite hard, and there wasn't like a lot of awareness at the time about balanced nutrition, how to eat, understanding the importance of food, not as something just to satisfy your hunger or to satisfy your taste. It's it's fuel, and if you eat and drink wisely, you'll optimize what you can do with your body and your mind. And so I developed. I guess I remember I first did it to make weight. I remember throwing up my dinner, thinking, "Oh, that's a convenient way to do it," because I like to eat, and I thought I could just do that. I remember specifically the first time I had my head over a toilet bowl doing it, and that led me down. It was like a key to was a dangerous path of bulimia. It became a simple way to stay on weight and still enjoy my food. But then I noticed it started to happen just regularly, even with drinking water, with anything. And it sounds bizarre, but it controlled me. And I was always just looking at the scales, no matter what, any time of day. And so I ended up giving up rowing because of that. Because one time I was in a regatta and I weighed in at 68.9 kilos, and I just realised this is ridiculous. I've got to find
what was
way.
What was the target weight that you were trying to hold?
72.5 was the maximum, but usually my target was about 71.5. But I'd come down a fair bit to get there, and but I think it was consuming my mind more than anything. Wait, get it down, and people made
you were no longer making weight for rowing's sake.
No,
you were making weight for the sake of making weight.
Making weight, and to avoid people making jokes, coming up and pinching me and say, "Hey, if you had lost that," and so actually the actual purpose of making weight was had nothing to do with the rowing. As years continued on, I think I always had some self-esteem issues anyway, just in the areas of my career and personal life. And unfortunately, the bulimia continued, and it's something which, I still haven't, I still have it occasionally now. And when it happens, it's always related to whether it's a pressure issue or something which I'm having some issues to do, whether it's a personal issue. Again, occasionally I lack self-esteem, and then again when it comes to you, again you've got your head over the toilet bowl, and then you feel really terrible about yourself for letting it happen, and then you go back to zero again, and you have to restart and take control back of your mind. It's a bit like a robber in the dark. I think you don't know it's coming, and suddenly it's out there and it's got you, and time sort of slows because you do recognise, oh, here I am doing what I shouldn't be doing, but it's it's something which I do. It's very rare now, but I will never say it's gone. I think I have to recognise that, because there are ways to recognise little trigger signals in my behaviour. So if I can mentally sort of say, hey, this is because of a self-esteem issue, or somebody's really offended me about something unfairly, or it can be criticism too, which I know we have to take criticism, but this is a vulnerability of mine that I have to try and monitor and control. And for the most part I do, but occasionally it does still get the better of me.
Am I right in thinking your first ultra event was the IndyPac?
First ultra cycling event, was the IndyPac.
So how did you bridge the gap between that relationship with the weight on the scales and the way that you viewed food with the other end of the spectrum, which was having to regularly and consistently eat high carbohydrate food to remain sustained, to be able to see through the ultra event? Because in my mind, as somebody ignorant to the psychological demands of bulimia, obviously I experienced in it and understand the demands of a downturn in one's mental health, but in that specific manifestation, it's not something I can speak to. So from my point of view, the story that you've described there, and thank you very much for sharing that, is disconnected from the process of practically fueling for an ultra endurance event. So has that been a positive, whereby you put yourself in that regimented environment where you know you need to view food as fuel because it's going to get you to the finish line, and that allows you to enjoy the process of doing so? Or do you find yourself wrestling with this as you go on these events?
No, I think the former. I think even going back to, which was I forgot to answer part of your question originally about how cycling helped me when I had my problem with rowing. One of the I sort of sometimes joke about this, but one of the things that attracted me about cycling was that, hey, here's a sport you can do where you have to eat. Rowing was a sport I was starving myself all week just to row, but here I could actually eat while I'm cycling. And then fast forward, and I started doing Ironman triathlons, and I started to, like you said, I think the importance of food, I became more aware of it. It's not a bad thing, food. Food is really important, and the right food. But you can also enjoy, a balance, and you don't have to rob yourself of some of your, favourite dishes or desserts or whatever you like. It's about balance. It's taken me a long time to get to understand it, but a sport like cycling and in Ironman triathlon, that helped me sort of see food as a really important fuel, not just for the event, but for life. And coming fast forward to the ultra distance cycling, like IndyPac, like I never had a bout of bulimia during IndyPac or even during an Ironman triathlon, because by that time I was totally the event, whether it's IndyPac or Ironman, the event and the process of training and preparing for it is such a big commitment. You don't even quite often didn't have time to think about some of the other pressures that were playing in my mind and upsetting me. Sometimes when it's returned, it can be after those events. And so you think, gee, you've just understood why you eat food and why you need, particularly with IndyPac, you have to eat a lot of food, or you just need a lot of calories. Otherwise, you won't. You just won't get to the finish line. So, more of my struggles are usually not during these events or during the process, but they can be just soon after. Where I think also, as you'd understand, Fergus, that after a big event, you are mentally and physically drained and emotionally drained, and you are actually vulnerable at that point, perhaps more so than maybe just up until you finished an event, when you're actually empowered with strong confidence, self-worth, because you need all that positive energy in your head and mind to prepare and get to where you can in that challenge. But then afterwards, the fatigue is huge.
It's one of the things that I try and factor in as best I can, but you can plan and plan and plan, but it's still going to punch you in the face. It's getting my teeth stuck into something after a big event is always something I have planned and ready to go. but then I also try and build in some downtime because I feel that I've essentially earned that. And it sounds strange to say that I feel that's the wrong thing to do, because actually I've gone from, and you'll fully understand this, I'd be interested to get your take on holidays, because it's something I constantly wrestle with, is if you set your life up for a period of 6 months to be able to get to the finish line of said event, that has become the norm. That intensity, that day-to-day has become the norm. So when you turn it off like a switch because you've done the event, it's like you've just removed your modus operandi, your day-to-day status quo completely, which is going to make you feel like you're in a tailspin, even though it's the logical human thing to do, because you're giving yourself the space to drink some wine, have some pizza, spend some time with your friends, all these things. But in reality, you're kind of cutting yourself off cold turkey from the structures that were very demanding, but had become normalized to you, which is why I find it so difficult to settle into a holiday or time off, because I'm so used to sort of juggling lots of different things. That means when I'm not juggling different things, I don't really know what to do with my brain. So it takes me a few days to really settle. So I actually almost need to wean myself off with training first thing in the morning, doing an hour or two of work if I'm trying to take some time off, because the time off is kind of scaled. Otherwise, I know that the time off is going to have more of an impact on the other side when I try and get back into the rhythm that I know is good for me. It sounds almost disordered in a sense in terms of control, but I think looking at things practically, it's if you enjoy the process and the journey that gets you to the end goal, you need to acknowledge that process and that journey was fulfilling by having those processes and structures and habits in place. So you shouldn't remove all of them all at once. Maybe it means that actually, if you were tracking your calories the whole way through to stay at a certain weight, so that your wattage output was going to move you at this pace, then maybe you stop tracking calories, but you still train every day for a decent amount of time, and it's pick things off one by one rather than just drop everything all at once. So, given that you've spent, I mean, the longest ride you've done is it IndyPac, or how far do you get on race across America? Because the amount of work and commitment that went into it, and then the drop off on the other side, how have you managed it in the past?
Yeah, look, it's very interesting what you were just saying. IndyPac was 5,471 kilometres. So I did IndyPac twice, 1.5 times. I didn't finish it the first time. The second time I did, and I found that it's interesting the further, because it's not time, so it's however long it takes. And I remember getting closer to the finish, thinking, oh, this is now all coming to an end. I started by this time next week or in 3 days. I don't want this to end. I even started to slow up a bit because I didn't want it to end, and because I knew I'm going to be at a loss next week, even though I had to go back to work, earn some money. There was a whole list of to-do things that were building up. But for me, I was just thinking, there's nothing. Oh my gosh!
But that goes back to the first question on the peace that you experienced as a child, surfing waves. It's the same mechanism, isn't it? It's safety from the chaos of the world. And you're like, whilst I'm suffering and having a bad time, my life is now boiled down to riding a bike forwards. That's it. Yes. That's all I need to worry about, which is very simple. And life is very complex. So I feel like it shields us quite nicely from the world.
Yeah, well, that's why I even quite often people say, oh, how do you torture yourself like this? And I think, well, I'm actually very fortunate that my life has got me in a position where I have the opportunity to do this. And I try and remind myself there's a lot of people can't have this opportunity. And even when people talk about the suffering, I say, well, this is something I've signed up for. This is something I'm looking for. I mean, there's people, as we all know, whose suffering is like I say, real suffering, and through circumstances beyond their control, and they certainly haven't invited it in various levels. So I don't know whether suffering is the right thing that we can say that we do in our challenges. We're pursuing a certain, I guess, degree of how much we can endure.
Difficulty, I think, is probably
difficulty. Yeah, because there's people out there. We all just have to go outside our homes, and we'll see people in far worse circumstances, or in horrible circumstances. But I think after a major event, like obviously with Race Across America, last year, I didn't finish it. So there was a massive void there for a while. Also to deal with, the element of disappointment.
Do you want to talk us through what happened there?
Yep.
Because it's a big race. It's in the cycling community. It's well documented, but for those that maybe aren't as embedded in that, it is what it says on the tin. It is a race from the west to the east coast of America. It is that way around, isn't it? I'm right in saying.
Yeah, west to the east. Yeah.
Yeah, and the 52,000 meters of elevation, and the average finish time is the record just under 6 days. Am I
That's
right?
Saying? Yep, around about that. And there's a time limit of 12 days, and there's checkpoints along the way, so you have to reach certain checkpoints, otherwise you get eliminated. And the distance is 4,900 kilometres, so is that about 3,200 miles? And it's it goes through, goes over mountain ranges, through deserts, through flat, open, wind-exposed terrain, and it's really brutally hard. And the finishing percentage is only 38%, so 62% don't finish. And most of the people who do it their first time get as we talked about, the punch in the face, and I got one of those on day 3. Here I know, and it was only like 800 or 900 kilometres into it, and I know that I've ridden further than that, and so I still remember the moment I stopped, and the crew took me out. They pulled me because I was having an ulnar nerve issue, which was meaning my whole went right up my arm, and I couldn't balance myself on the handlebars properly. So I was riding in a really bad situation, and that was causing other issues. And also riding in a position as I was dangerous just from staying on the bike. So it was the best call to make for my safety, but also for the concern of the support crew who are following me. They don't like seeing someone on the precipice, metaphorically, and in some cases literally, where there's some drops down the mountainside, riding like that, and to have to go through that anxiety themselves is unfair. But despite all that, when you stop, the emotion was just like somebody just injected with this massive cocktail of mixed emotions, from the obvious disappointment, then there was embarrassment, then there was accountability, then there was shame, all these other elements which had been in my life, through lack of self-worth, everything. It was just all at once. And then you're fatigued from the accumulative fatigue, and then you've put so much, and others have put so much into helping you. It's a real massive emotional overload. But I found that you have to accept that. You have to embrace that disappointment, and you can't just sort of bottle it up and say, I understand, no problem. You have to sort of allow that emotion to come out. Well, this is what I felt. Allow that emotion to come out. Allow to be expressive in how, whether you're tears or there's anger or whatever. It's a human. I think it's a naturally understandable human reaction for anything when you put so much into something, and it not that it doesn't necessarily get to the end goal you're aiming for, but to end so soon. That was horrific. But then after that, I realised there was a point you've also got to say, okay, I've embraced the emotion. I have to put that aside, and you have to do this at the right time when you're in the right frame of mind to do it, and just to look at the areas where that led to that situation where you were at least not able to produce what you felt was your best performance. And I've found that a really exciting challenge. This is like, and I've said to people sometimes, the goal you're looking for to reach, whether it's a medal, whether it's a finish in a race, or whether it's to reach a summit, or whether it's to maybe get that promotion at work, that job you've always wanted, and you just don't get it. But sometimes along the way, when you look at that journey, the reward you get is the one you just don't expect coming. In work, it could be a position that someone says, "What about this job?" You go, "Oh wow!" I mean, it could be I never thought I'd be. It can be something out of the blue. In a journey with something like Race Across America, I've really found I've got a real buzz out of breaking down this process. Okay, this is a setback, a massive setback, but breaking it down and now working on how to better optimise the opportunity I have, and I'm very fortunate to have another go at it this year. So I'm already finding that, and that parlays into day-to-day life, I think, in so many ways. And I'm loving it right now, that whole process. How far I get down the road in RAAM this year, we'll find out in due course. But I think it's a really exciting opportunity I've got to do. It's very expensive RAAM too, because you need about 80,000 Australian dollars to fund the actual trip and everything. So you've got to, you have sponsors, you have support crew who invest a lot of time and energy, and they can't necessarily always just come back every year as well. So you have to work on the structuring or restructuring of your support crew, and being aware that it's very fatiguing on them. It's massively fatiguing because they've got to work without sleep, or they have to manage sleep as much as the rider has to, and they have to manage the connectivity between the support crew. They can have all the skill sets, but they have to blend and mix well as people. And there's many a story of the rider being out there in front, oblivious to the fact that behind him the support crews, there's guns out, knives out, and they're looking for ways to, maybe not that bad, but you know what I mean? It's like, because you don't want to let the rider know that something's going wrong within the support crew. So, but all that, there's this myriad dynamics of elements to race across America that makes it such a fascinating human event.
Massively so. The support crew thing's hilarious, really, because the last big event I did, that I'm still sort of psychologically a little bit up and down from, because it's kind of big peak. You're like, well, I can't practically do any more than that within the context of a year around the businesses and everything else going on. So it's like, well, what can you do that's as exciting as something that big, which is something I'm wrestling with as we go. But double Ironman distance triathlon in hilly Wales, Snowdonia, and none of the support crew slept at all. I think Johnny slept. So Johnny's my business partner with Omnia, and he slept for 15 minutes before he came up Snowdon with me as my support runner. But that was at 7:30 a.m., 24 and a half hours after we'd started the following Saturday, and he'd been doing all the driving. And occasionally when they were handing me food, one person was handing me food, and I just heard the hubbub in the car like 5 yards back that way, and I was like, what on earth are they talking about? And they were just sniggering, and they lost their minds. But it was great, because it was whenever I was suffering, they just drove up, and they were just so full of energy and just borderline loopy that it gave me a real boost. And I think that's why the connectivity that you mentioned, I've always been very fortunate to sort of have that in people around me. But people need to know how to interact with you. They need to be able to look into your eyes and know, are you positive? Are you negative? Are you practical? Are you self-deprecating? Are you cracking a joke? Are you telling them what they need to do? Do you need to be direct? And having those people around you is very important, because it sort of outsources your brain somewhat and allows you to keep moving forwards. And I can imagine you must have a reliable group of people that can look into your eyes and determine what needs to happen next. And it's but as you mentioned, I mean, RAAM, huge commitment, huge expensive commitment, other side of the world for you, and it's something that I can imagine at this point is very intimidating. So how many months out are we now? Six months out?
6. Yeah, we're in January. Yeah, getting to 6, maybe 5, even.
Yeah.
So it's this whole thing of the training again is kind of the training is the easy part. There's the rest of the other to-do list, and then keeping an engagement with your support crew. It's very easy to sort of realise, I haven't spoken to them, because we're in different places around. We've got some of the support crew in America, and some are in different places here in Australia, and it's very easy to suddenly get disconnected with them, because you can get so engrossed in just your training, and you go, gee, we haven't had a RAAM crew meeting for a while, and you've got to keep them, and they will need to keep in contact with you, just to keep that connectivity going, just like a battery charge, isn't it? You got to keep the battery charged up, otherwise it takes a lot longer to get it going later.
And it makes the process of bringing it all to life just as exciting as the start line, which I think is fantastic. So, a question from my end is, point blank, would you say that your self-worth is currently attached to RAAM, or does it go beyond that? Because that association that you seem to have made over the years, there is an argument that could be made that it's tied into these events. And this is a question I often ask myself, is if I'm not doing these big events and I'm not constantly pushing the needle, then who actually am I? And that's not something that's not a trap I want to fall into. So I'm trying to be hyper aware of my relationship with that stuff. And you're clearly very self-aware of it because of the bulimia. But big races like RAAM take so much from you that I can imagine there's moments where months and months pass and you haven't really had a chance to reflect upon yourself and the direction you're going on. So where are you at in terms of that sense of shame, that sense of self-worth that you've wrestled with in the past? Where does that sit right now?
It's a really good question, Fergus, because I think it's something which I feel I'd be lying if I said I never doubt my worth. There are times I do, and then people say, but look at all the training you do, everything you're doing with RAAM. I go, but I don't know, just for some reason I feel, like, what's my purpose here? What am I doing? Sometimes I have occasionally said, well, what happens next after RAAM? Is RAAM going to define me as a person? I'm throwing everything into RAAM, but I don't think it's necessarily, I don't want it to define me as a person. So I can't just rely on RAAM as being a crutch for me to find self-worth. There's got to be something bigger, because life is bigger than a bike race. I think, right now I'm feeling very good, but there are still moments where the self-worth still raises its head, the little demon raises its head. And that can be to do with sometimes with the wrestling with, not wrestling, just the challenge of getting, the personalities that you need in a RAAM campaign, and then not just talk about the support crew, just the personalities or the people in your lives. You really need the people who know you, and I guess this is where the support. I quite often say the support team is not just the 8 people who come on the event. The support team are the people who really know me as a person, and they're aware of my vulnerabilities, and they can perhaps see the things that are going to trigger that. But at the end of the day, too, you've got to be, I think, as a human being, you can have all the support in the world, but you need to have the strength to take the step forward and go alone as well. You can't just rely on people as well. So I think that's still an area I'm still working on, and the RAAM program, I guess it can be seen as sometimes as maybe helping me to put that away and sort of almost park that issue. But I have to be aware that I can't just park it and it'll just disappear. So, like, for example, after RAAM, whatever challenges I have coming up, I'm sure that issue is something I'm going to have to work on. It's a really good question, Fergus, and I'm sorry I haven't got the full, complete answer. Maybe it reflects the existence of how deep that issue is.
Absolutely, and it's if there was a clear answer, then it maybe it wouldn't be a problem anymore. It is the argument, or if you had total clarity, it'd be easier to know what to do next. And I think the reflection on these things is what matters, not the conclusions, to a certain degree, because a lot of people are afraid of even reflecting on the way that they interact with themselves, the way that they feel in the first place. And as you sort of alluded to, I think honesty with those around you is what matters most, as I've experienced over the years. Is I'm now as happy telling Kev from the pub that's 40 years my senior, that I've met for the first time, that I attempted suicide in 2016. That's a part of who I am, and it's something that I'm not in any way ashamed of. But it's something that I have to constantly reflect on. And yes, there's conclusions I've drawn from it, but there's always more to reflect upon within that, and how can I avoid ever putting myself in that position again, and what are the decisions, and how do I interact with the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, how am I analytical about how I respond and feel about things. And yeah, I think being honest and reflective is the most effective thing we can do, rather than necessarily having all the answers. So no, thank you for sort of unpacking that, because it's something I'm wrestling with as well at the moment. It's a tough one, and I think that the bigger you push these challenges and these events, it becomes more complex, because I have the challenge of trying to sort of be creative with how I can work in strength stuff from a strength perspective, and then work in endurance stuff, but also understand that I'm never going to be winning these things. I'm never going to be winning these events because of the strength bias that I have. So how can I sort of sit somewhere in the middle that brings other people along this journey with me, because I've got so much value from it, and then I get into this perpetual cycle of overthinking these things and trying to determine what to do next, and it's difficult. It is difficult. So I don't, to make you feel like I don't have all the answers either at all from my own perspective. So we're the same there. We're the same there. But the solitude that you take from riding, that opportunity that you've referenced being fortunate to have. You've written 15 books. You've reported on Olympics, World Cups, cricket, everything. How does that solitude writing compared to the solitude of riding?
That's also an interesting one. The solitude of writing, I guess it depends on the circumstance of what you're doing. You know, if it's a football match report and there's a deadline, you know, in many ways you're actually not even thinking, you're doing it impulsively, you know, based from the perceptions of what's happening of the game in front of you and all that. If you go to the flip side of it, to writing a book, you know, there's another area. It's a bit like the difference between, I guess, doing Race Across America or riding a criterium bike race. You know, it's a completely other scope of thought. And I think with writing books, again, it comes down to what the subject of the book is. My last book that I wrote was a book called Overlander, which was about my rediscovery of this genre of cyclists who used to cycle across Australia in the late 1890s, and this is part of the element of the story which I probably should have mentioned before. Is I was writing another book on the history of Australian cycling called Power of the Pedal, and in chapter 2 I was writing about these cyclists called the Overlanders, and these intrepid souls who would head across the then unknown Australia. They'd be just like a couple, the main cities on the seaboards, but a lot of Australia was unknown then. They would just follow camel pad tracks, take some dried meat, a bit of water, a shotgun, because they're going to have to hunt, and find out what's in the middle of Australia. And I remember thinking, oh, these people are crazy, and they could make a book in themselves. No sooner did I finish submitting that manuscript for that history book into the publisher, I saw an ad for the first IndyPac, and it said, "Is there the Overlander in you?" And I thought, there you go. There's the platform in which I can rediscover the story of the Overlander. And so that's what originally drew me into that IndyPac environment. Notwithstanding, I did have this, I've had this love of endurance sport and seeing how far I can, to what limits I can handle certain situations. And so that's where that came in. And even when I wrote that book, Overlander, I hadn't really got into the thought of like why I do all this anyway. And it was only like an afterthought at the very end. I thought I better write a couple of pages just about why I do it. So, and a lot of what we're just talking about is I was just writing, and it all just came flooding out to the point where the publisher even said, "Look, Rupert, that's a really important add-on chapter, but that's almost a book in itself." So they had to do a bit of an edit on, cutting it back as far as in the context of what the subject of the book was about. But it was actually a really important element. So obviously that was, writing about something which is your experiences and then going deeper into the reason why you're in that situation in the first place. That was really challenging because I was so long used to just writing about other people, other athletes, even though I thought I had empathy for their circumstance and how they handled defeat and victory, scandal, misjustice, or whatever. I always felt like I was able to be at least objective and I try and understand them. But then to write about yourself was quite challenging, not just because you've thought gee, are people going to be really interested in what I write? But it was also about me. It was also the fact you had to owe it to yourself to go deep into your heart and soul and into your mind about what are the influences in your life that lead you to this. So that was a massive challenge. But like you were saying, Fergus, I'm comfortable in that process has helped me make me much more comfortable talking about a lot of those vulnerabilities. And I don't like to say they're weaknesses, because I prefer vulnerabilities, because they're areas of potential growth. If you can recognise them and work on them, that can help, make you a better person, or can perhaps help other people understand you better. So I don't see that the word weaknesses can be sometimes used in the wrong context. But vulnerability is just it's kind of an exciting area of growth, and that's what I'm finding now. And maybe that's given me some self-worth. Here we go back to this self-worth area again. But I find it a thrilling exercise, and if it helps other people do the same and talk about what they're struggling with, if they are or not, I mean, it serves a tremendous purpose, I think.
No, agreed. I couldn't agree more on the vulnerabilities being a growth opportunity rather than an inherent negative. Because,
it does.
I mean, companies restructure because of vulnerabilities to become stronger. Mm-hmm. The best athletes on the world, if they have weak hamstrings, great, I have an opportunity to be better because I can make my hamstrings stronger, which will make me more reinforced. It's you can't be better without acknowledging where you are currently limited. Mm-hmm. And then working through that. But for some reason, from a human perspective, we have a tendency to think, oh, my weaknesses are my weaknesses, that's who I am. Whereas you've shown that actually, if you take one step into the unknown and the uncomfortable, whilst it did seem to be a sort of work pilgrimage, it sort of had a neat byproduct of being a very intrinsically fulfilling exercise.
Yeah. I found recently I was giving a talk for one of my sponsors, and the talk started where I had some photos on behind me, and it started with 3 big letters, DNF. And I started by saying, DNF, the 3 letters nobody likes to see against their name, whether it's a fun 10K fun run or whether it's with anything. People don't like to have official did not finish against their name. I said, it sucks, it hurts, and I recounted my moment where my RAAM stopped, and I explained again how I had to but then there comes a point, you have to embrace the disappointment, allow that emotion to come out. It's normal, don't be ashamed of it, it's totally normal, but there comes a point where you have to look at everything objectively, and I was trying to parlay that into how in a work environment the same can happen. You have to handle setbacks and then work to improve. And then the talk finished where the 3 letters DNF came back up, and I ended up saying DNF, and you could see it, people going, yeah, DNF, did not finish, it sucks. I said DNF is did not fail, and that to me represents you're able to take the disappointment of the did not finish to a did not fail, because that bookends that experience, that process of acceptance, accountability, and setting on a new process of where we go forward with this in a positive way, and what we learn from something. And to me, if you learn something from a setback, that's already a success. It's definitely not a failure. So to me, DNF, it sucks if you don't finish something, but DNF doesn't have to be.
It sucks even more if you don't learn anything from it.
Exactly.
That's the way that I look at things. Is failure is essential for growth, and I think the sooner that I reframe that, the more I could thrive as an individual, personally, professionally, athletically, and I think I'm gonna be bold and say I believe it's a universal truth. So I think that the sooner we can learn to fail fast and learn from it, the more aggressively we can move ourselves forwards in all walks of life. So thank you very much for that. Really enjoyed such a range of conversation. Where is the best place for people to find more about what you're up to, RAAM campaign, how they can monitor it as and when it goes live in the sort of summertime?
Yeah, well, I'm on my Instagram, Rupert.Guinness on Instagram, and my Facebook, just Rupert.Guinness, and you'll see
You
me
got
there.
website as well, don't you? Which I'll put in the show notes down below.
Yeah. I've got a website, but I'm actually reworking that one, the website, because I sort of make some changes to it. So
I won't put it in the show notes down below, though.
We'll
leave it
one
for the time being. Yeah. No, all good. Well, no, thank you very much, and all the best for what I can imagine is going to be a very grueling 6 months of training, logistics, and introspection. So, thank you again.
No, thanks, Fergus. It's been a real joy chatting to you, and this chat alone has already helped me in my own way. So, thank you for that, and all the best with what you're doing and your challenges ahead.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Cheers.